So real life, someone's gonna monitor on the other side. I'm just gonna minimize everything. So, you know, right? We have to.
Yep, I'm gonna alt tab and just
Yeah, you know,
go
guys,
between
your
the two.
thing.
Yeah.
Anything you need from the
So
bar?
is audio from this camera? or just
No,
that
from the other one. The one outside.
Good to know.
Yeah, the one outside.
Yeah, we might close this door.
Yeah.
Maybe?
There we go. Yeah, there's one cable that doesn't go the way, but
Yeah, but we can go most of the way and
Yes.
get the same idea accomplished.
Thank you guys.
Thank you. Love it. Lovely. Absolutely enchanting. Press your paws. Whoa, bro, I didn't mean it.
He wants something in.
But yeah, dude, what's that place called? The Hobby Center? Is that it? On that? Yeah, it's the Hobby Center. Yes, the Hobby Lobby.
Did you hear the vocal cues? Basically, they're gonna say, should be saying, please play video 1.
Video 1, there's multiple different videos.
It's in the same video. You'll stop and then go to the next
Oh,
one.
I was just gonna try to listen along.
That's what I'm
Hopefully
saying. That's
you'll-
the kind of vocal cues.
Just if you hear it and I don't, just tell me.
Go.
I'll be listening, but like, you gotta say it super country now. You gotta say one. Definitely sounds very similar.
Yeah, we were just sitting there talking.
When do we kick off? I mean, yeah, I'll take the free night. Thanks, dog. Dude. Yeah. Yes. Where's wireless 2? Guy. Who? Who was it?
Christine's asking to come.
Sure.
Thank you.
Fade it out.
Also, the live stream looks great so far.
Awesome. Live stream looks great so far. This is exactly the start I. So this is lovely. Ah.
Oh, no.
Savage. You know, I didn't think about this. If that music's playing and it's live streaming, it could get struck for copyright. If it's broadcast by Facebook, then everywhere.
He was just here to set it up. He should be floating around here somewhere.
Okay, perfect.
Hello, good evening, everybody.
We're good. I think we're good.
My name is Christine Ortega. I'm the Executive Director of the Encuentro. So again, welcome to the world premiere of the celebration of Texas Mexican food, Encuentro 2023. You know, we're gathered in a very important place, and I want to be mindful that we understand as we get this program started that we are part of a continuum, right? Whether we're cooking and learning from our past ancestors, and then we're switching it up and doing something crazy and molecular, we're part of a continuum. And so because of that, I want us to acknowledge that we're gathered on the traditional homelands
What's the other thing?
of the Atacama, Ishak, Acoquisa, Caddo, Swahili, and Comanche people,
Yeah.
and all their relations and trading partners who visited here,
Yeah. And it has that overlay.
us here tonight.
Play button.
You're in for a treat. You're in for a big treat tonight. You're going to be hungrier than when you got here. And if you are hungrier, we have abundance for you from HB outside. But we also, because we're part of a continuum, we need to also acknowledge the people today who made this possible. We have some great advisors who were part of this planning process, including Alice Valdez with MECA. Alberto Cárdenas, Susan Christian. Yes, you can all applaud. You know these people, they definitely are worthy of an applaud. Elmer Donaldson Rogers, Francis Castañeda, Kiki Francis, Betty Fernandez, Rachel Galán, and we're truly grateful for your guidance as advisors to the Encuentro 2023. We are also thankful for our sponsors, right? Because again, without them, nobody, we would not function. So we need to thank them. If you don't mind, I would like to tell you who they are so that you can again just be mindful whenever you feel like you need something, go there and get appropriate in your life. Humanities Texas gave us the seed grant for this event, so we're grateful to that, and it's part of the National Endowment for the Humanities. So Adan helped get that grant, which was an anchor that then helped us catapult for the other sponsors. HEB came in a very big way, so we're grateful to them. MECA came in the facility, right? This is TBH and MECA in the same facility now on the east side. Beto Cárdenas, Peking Properties, Soul Fit Grill, Texas Tech University Press, Bayside Printing, and our co-sponsor, of course, the City of Houston, Mayor Sylvester Turner's Office of Special Events. That's for them all. And now let's get this panel cooking. Let me introduce Adan Medrano. He's a food author, chef, and filmmaker, researcher of the indigenous food and cooking of South Texas and Northeastern New Mexico. For over 23 years, he worked throughout Latin America, Europe, and Asia, and during his travels came to recognize the cultural importance of food. So, Adan.
So I guess I could use a lovely microphone.
so nice to have you here. All these 2 days, me he sentido tan en casa. It's all been about that, so thank you for being here. I want to welcome you and tell you that Encuentro is an Encuentro. We have to be here with an open heart. And it's going to affirm the importance of food in our lives. I hope you enjoy the specially selected scenes from the documentary feature film, Food Texas Mexican, which is now distributed internationally by Amazon. And the director of the film flew all the way from Uruguay, South America, to be here this evening. His name is Aníbal Capuano. Where are you? Also with us is the producer of the film, a star in the feature film industry. She's living in Houston now, a native of San Antonio. She was also co-location manager for the feature film Serena. So she organized when J-Lo was in the stadium, she organized that. And that's Virginia Diaz, a producer of our film. Where are you over there? So the makers of the film are here. I want to, so let me introduce the moderator for tonight. And then he will take over. Dr. Mario Montaño is a cultural anthropologist and folklorist. His research focuses on the foodways of the Texas-Mexico border and the northern region of Mexico. His interests are on the anthropology of food. How do food-centered activities influence the construction of cultural and gender identity? How do food preparation, distribution, and consumption contribute to men and women's social position and power? How does food symbolically connote maleness and femaleness? In addition, Dr. Montaño developed a university-level course on the Rio Grande River, focusing on the different regional cultures that live along the Rio Grande River. So I present to you our moderator for this evening, Dr. Mario Montaño.
Thank you, Rodan, for the kind introduction. It is an honor to be hosting this event, this Encuentro land that has seen so much diversity, changes, challenges, and continues to flourish. And I want to also share thoughts about the tastings with the events. Many of you were not present this morning, but they had a great tasting performance here and working with us and everything. So now what I'm going to do is to introduce Dr. Liliana Saldaña. In tonight's program, my three colleagues have selected segments from the documentary feature, Truly Texan Mexican. It is groundbreaking documentary streaming in the United States and worldwide in both English and Spanish. You can find it on Amazon Prime, Google TV, and YouTube. The first segment you will watch was selected by Dr. Liliana Patricia Saldaña. Professor Liliana B. Saldaña is an associate professor of Mexican American Studies at the University of Texas at San Antonio, American Studies. She also co-directors of the Mass Teachers Academy, which provides public education with curricular and pedagogical support to teach Mexican American Studies in K through 12. Her research interests include the colonial struggles in education, indigenous foodways, and the coloniality of public celebrations like San Antonio's 10-day fiesta event. Dr. Saldaña is excited to teach a new course titled Mexican American Foodways, Recipes for Wellness, Justice, and Liberation, which will be offered for the first time during August at UTSA. When she's not teaching or doing public scholarship, she's learning about Mesoamerican gastronomy and indigenous foodways to share through community-based cooking workshops. And she does gastronomy presentations. Inspired by her mama, the best cook she knows, and her family struggles with diabetes, Saldaña's vision as a teacher, cook, activist is to encourage people in her community to reclaim indigenous foods for personal and collective wellness. So now let's look at Dr. Saldana's film selection. Please play video number 1.
Play video.
We're in South Central North America. It happens to be Bexar County, Texas, in San Antonio. And if you look over here, just on the other side of the trees, where the low trees are growing, still down here on the bottom, that's 10,000 years old. All through here we excavated 700 square meters from 20 different encampments. And we found earth ovens, projectile points, knives, scrapers, mussel shells. The south central part of the North American continent. It's a very important place for literally international travel from Central America to Mexico along the highway that the Spanish call the Camino Real, which comes right through here. We know that road literally at one level comes from Mexico City all the way through northern Mexico and the mountains, all the way across the Rio Bravo and goes to St. Louis, and that's where there were huge pyramids 2,000 years ago. And the people who managed those pyramids in St. Louis, Cahokia Mounds, knew people who managed pyramids in Mexico City. The Indian people who lived here, different from many other places, were always hunters and gatherers. 15,000 years ago, they were hunting mammoths. 1,000 years ago, they were hunting white-tailed deer. And through most of that time, they were plant foods that are all around us today. We're standing on a terrace surface, and this terrace is 50,000 years old. So every person who ever walked through southern Bexar County walked on the same surface we're standing on. And whatever they dropped, whatever they did, that evidence was left here. See how it has kind of a pointed end here? That pointed end was mounted on a stick, and that was used to groove bone and wood and make a groove in it so then it could be snapped. It's called a graver or an engraver. Everybody thinks they're the first people here. Even if they're the Spanish, they think the Spanish were the first here. They don't look back into understanding the depth of history. History is more than what we see in our lifetimes or whatever our grandparents tell us. Now I'll do it sideways like that was cross country. Here's what the Indians came for here. See, that's the plant. That's what these guys are after. That's what. See, cut yourself with it every time. But this is what the river. This river supplied. This was probably the most important resource.
It makes me emotional that's who I am, knowing that.
And not only knowing that you belong here, but part of the evidence is that the foods here, your body is sustained on the same foods that the ancestors were thousands of years ago. And right here where we are, we drove past all of the nopalitos, all of the nutus that are coming in, the onions are there, the fruits are all here, pecans, where did pecans come from? They're northeastern Mexico and South Texas, where pecans come from. Tomatoes are strictly Native American. Squash, beans, all of these foods are all Native American foods that sustain the whole world. And they were domesticated right here. But if you think about where you're standing, your ancestors have been standing here, breathing this air for 10,000 years. And that's got to be empowering. It's an empowering story because it opens up the whole question of North America. How did North America come to be what it is today? And who are the immigrants? And who are the original inhabitants?
Buenas tardes. Good evening. I want to begin by thanking Dr. Alston Toms, who passed away last June. I was really sad to hear about his passing. I'm very grateful for the knowledge that he shared for this documentary. And so this particular segment really stood out to me because I'm the first in my family to be born in Yanaguana, also known as San Antonio, the land of the Payaya and the Coahuiltecan people. You know, growing up in Yanaguana, I learned that the first settlers were the Canary Islanders in 1718, that they were the ones who founded Yanaguana, San Antonio. And so it took many years of, you know, being in the community, listening to the stories of the elders, and of course, being in Mexican American studies, we have access to this knowledge, to a different perspective, right, a counter perspective. And so this segment stood out to me for that very reason. One, because, you know, in Texas K-12 schools, a lot of the work that I do is in public education, right, and curriculum development, and developing curricula that honors, you know, the true histories of people. And so, you know, Yanaguana, San Antonio is one of those cities that is famous, right, for quote unquote honoring and glorifying U.S. settlers, right? And much of that narrative is rooted, you know, in myth making and white supremacy. And so the narratives, whenever we teach these narratives or learn these narratives, it is a form of violence on our people. It is a form of epistemic violence on our people. So, you know, as I was listening to Dr. Alston, you know, I think I went back to this documentary, this particular segment, a few times because of the importance of really honoring, gaining a deeper understanding of the histories of indigenous peoples in present-day Texas, and the connections that they had with indigenous peoples since time eternal. You know, indigenous peoples in present-day South America and Central America, even in the Caribbean and present-day Mexico, were trading, were establishing very extensive trade routes, were exchanging, were bartering, were establishing relationships with indigenous peoples all the way, you know, to, I'm thinking of the Pueblo in New Mexico. You know, they were trading feathers, they were trading foods, they were trading other goods. And they were connected with people as far as present-day Illinois, with the Cahokian people. And so, you know, the images in the documentary are also very important, to see the mounds, right, of the Cahokia, and to see the pyramids of Mesoamerican peoples, because even though they spoke different languages, they may have had maybe different cosmological, you know, worldviews, they were indeed connected to trade, they were connected to these millenary ancestral relationships that they had established, and most importantly, they were connected through food, right? And so, you know, they were connected through, particularly in this region, right? And what we now call, and what Chef Medrano calls the Mexico-Texas Triangle, which is present-day South Texas, Central Texas, Coahuila, Tamaulipas, and the edges of San Luis Potosí, right? That they were all connected through these ancestral foods that had been, you know, domesticated by ancestors for thousands of years, 9,000 years, 10,000 years, you know, tunas, so prickly pears, squash, beans, amaranth, mesquite, pecan, sotol, a number of different foods. And so the question of, you know, who is the immigrant? It makes us present to the idea, and to the idea that many of us are not foreigners to this land, that many of us are, while we may be classified as immigrants by colonial laws, by geopolitical borders that were imposed by the United States, that we are indeed connected through our foodways. And so our foodways becomes a point of departure for decolonizing history, for speaking back against these narratives that continue to erase our stories. So this is one of the reasons why, my colleagues and I are always championing, ethnic studies. Because this is the history that children and youth in K-12 schools should be learning about. They shouldn't wait until they take a Mexican American Studies course, right, to learn this history. They should have access to African American studies. They should have access to, Native American studies and Mexican American studies, so that they can understand their histories, their complex histories, their multi-layered identities, and most importantly, so that they can really gain a deeper understanding of how we are all connected. How we are connected across borders, how we are connected across foods, and so that we can also envision the world that we want, and we can create a world for future generations. So those are my comments.
Well, thank you very much.
So much more to say, but I'll keep it at that.
Well, no, but that was an interesting clip that you selected depicting the first people of Texas. And of course, it does raise a question that you mentioned is who are the immigrants, who are the original inhabitants? As Dr. Thomas Bloom posed in the film, and as you so eloquently explained, what remains here is the intriguing and persistent and contentious question is who are the original people to Texas? And having said that, now I'm going to transition to introduce to you Dr. Bush, Leslie Bush. Leslie Bush is a paleo and ethnobotanist who specializes in identifying, interpreting of plant remains found on archaeological sites. Through her consulting practice, macro-botanical analysis, she has worked on sites in 18 states, including historic Spanish missions and ancestral cattle villages and painted rock shelters at the Lower Pecos region. Cooking is her favorite way to relax, whether making experimental dishes from wild plants or baking cornbread in the skillet she inherited from her grandmother. Leslie recently learned to make traditional pine needle baskets and hopes to incorporate more basketry in her food practices. And so now we're going to look at Dr. Bush's film selection. Can you please play video number 2?
You would ink it up and then you place your matrix right here. So then you put your paper like this down, and so then you put it through like this. Then it would end up looking like the impression. This is my Guadalupe print. That's one that I've done just because I've loved the idea of Guadalupe, who is a Mexican goddess. Most people refer to her as the goddess of birth and death. This is one of my other prints. We would have a tamalada. My family had a little pig, and so I can remember my mom, having a whole pig on the mesa, like in the countertop. I mean, how horrifying is that? And then why are you having this, right? Like, and you kind of there's a pig, it's dead, there's blood everywhere, and your mom,
And the light is just right. It shimmers.
Oh, that's great. That's beautiful.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
We shall. Do you like it? It's good.
It's good. And it's unique.
Like
People don't know that you could make a grapefruit. It's
Like I had never.
Oh my goodness. I think I grew up cooking because of my mom. She cooked for us. She did the tortillas de mano. She had her molcajete, which I have here. This is my mother's molcajete. I have here another place of honor. These are her kitchen towels, which she did embroider by hand when she was younger. Here you go. You know, you have this idea of women are supposed to be in the kitchen, but the people who get fame for being professional chefs are men. I mean, the only way that you can really account for that is, again, sexism. Like, you have to call it for what it is. People don't want to give women credit because women have traditionally not been acknowledged as experts. It's hard for people to accept women as experts. I think there always have been women there. They just have been relegated to the shadow areas. Cheers.
Mira, la cocina, pero sí cocina.
Cooking is, in my own way, part of art activism. It's part of our culture. And keep it up so that we can have the recipes that my mom taught me. Also just to be healthy, happy.
In the clip, and what I love about the clip is that it's about love, and not just her love for food, but for the tools of cooking and for her mom. So I want to start where her love of cooking started, with her mom and with the passing of food traditions from mother to daughter. One anthropologist has estimated that women in indigenous North American societies did 80% of the labor involved in food production. And I do want to be clear that by women, I mean people who are socially recognized as women. Both Cabeza de Vaca in 1535 and Alonso de Leon in, I think it's the Elder in 1650, but yeah. And, both of them mention people that they identify as men, who were dressing and living as women. So, in one small way, I think we're fortunate to be living in a time where it's so hotly contested, where what it means to be a man or a woman is so hotly contested, because it helps us understand that gender systems in former times might not map exactly onto anybody's idea of gender in the present. People in the past got to live how they wanted without reference to whether we liked it or whether we were going to like it or not. But because of how home food production and cooking seems to have been gendered in something akin to female in the past and in the present, the passing of tradition from mother to daughter, I think, is particularly important. And the clip invites us to think about how cooking traditions like Texas Mexican are sustained over hundreds to thousands of years. I mean, maybe not in the exact details, but in the core set of cooking techniques and ingredients that persist. Ms. DeLuna's story illuminates how traditions pass hand to hand, mother to daughter, story to story, in the kitchen. And the traditions also pass through artifacts, and as an archaeologist, this is absolutely my jam. She has her mother's molcajete, her mother's kitchen towels, and again, textiles, another tradition that worldwide is often associated with women. And the implements hold the stories, the memories in the molcajete and in the towels, the implements, the cooking implements that bring to mind the memories, bring to mind the cooking techniques and the dishes of her family's past. And these implements also help her pass the tradition on to other people, carrying the traditions into the future. And artifacts and memory are present at the beginning of the clip as well. We hear how much Ms. Luna loves her press. You know, another tool that passes on traditions through the written word and through artistic representation. Her wonderful prints. And it's maybe like the artistic representations on the painted rock shelters in the Lower Pecos region that we call rock art, in ways that maybe do violence to the original intention of that, but certainly they are iconographic representations that pass on information over centuries to millennia. And the Coatlicue print that Ms. Laguna makes, the goddess of birth and death, I think is a wonderful metaphor, because there's a lot of creativity in things that make us uncomfortable, like the head of dead pigs. Cooking requires death, even as it sustains our lives, and that's true on the plant end too. Onion bulbs and tubers and hearts of things require the death of the organism, so there is death there too. And also individual cooks pass away, taking their unique variations on the cuisine with them. But new cooks arise and make innovations, and the overall tradition continues. The last thing I wanted to say is about the middle scene here, where Ms. Laguna makes the grapefruit pie. Grapefruit isn't native to North or South America, but it's a beautiful innovation that evokes the taste of native fruits like plums and agorito and some kinds of tunas and zapotes. So just a beautiful clip. So many beautiful clips.
Thank you, Dr. Bush, for helping to reveal an archaeological finding how cooking implements carried women's stories across generations. This is an inheritance that underscores the principal role of women and two-spirited people in creating flavor profiles and engineering the cooking technologies of today. As the artist Celeste de Luna in the film states, women have always been there, but relegated to the shadows. End of quote. So now, I would like to introduce Adan Medrano. The next segment we'll watch is from the noted researcher, food author, and filmmaker Adan Medrano. Adan is an independent researcher, chef, and the executive producer of the film Truly Texas Mexican. You could have groundbreaking insights adding to the culinary landscape and to cultural identity. So let's look at his film selection. Please play video number 3.
You know, there's something very graphic about dealing with the raw piece of meat and a head, right? Even my friends freak out. I think one of them blew up once. So I season it with salt and pepper. I do use the garlic cloves. My grandmother would always use a white linen, just plain white linen. The process is you really have to immerse the fabric in water. The burlap is the secondary wrap, and that too should be soaked in water, actually longer than 24 hours.
¿Dónde aprendiste esto, Cristina?
Oh my God. Everybody says, get on Google and figure out how to do it. And I'm like, no, I refuse to do that. I'll just keep asking all the elders that I know until I get it. And so that's my process. I sort of just wanted to make things more genuine in a way that we can experience. How to regain knowledge. Exactly. Learning in the traditional ancient way is kind of fun. Today we started to prep the hole, which is about maybe 3 to 4 feet deep. And we fill it with process, and we fill it with hot drops. We typically need a minimum of, like, I would say 4 to 5 hours to actually heat the hole, and then also to make sure that the earth is cured with the heat. I will recruit my fire starters. My brothers are the best at that. My brother Adrian is here today. He's the one that, I nestled him into it. So he's great.
Been here all day and drinking water, sweating water. By the time I stand up, I was like 5 minutes. As a little boy, My grandfather would do that. He would do the whole tend the fire. And cuisine talks about it originated from ancestors. Past tribes that used to use it, things like that. It's just, you can't forget that.
These are pieces of firecracker rock, pieces of sandstone. This sandstone is the bedrock that outcrops all around us. And that's what became the heating element of an earth. We know in general that all of that was used to cook. They cook all kinds of foods in earth ovens, like barbacoa pits. In fact, the first history book written of South Texas and Northeastern Mexico is full of information, and it's written in 1650. And that history book tells you how important barbacoa pits were, and how all of the Indian people from Austin to Monterey all cooked in earth ovens.
Tell me how you want quickly.
Let's go in the middle.
Just straight down?
Straight down, brother.
The
The part on the very bottom, that's it. Yep. You drop the glass samples. You put more coals around it, right?
On top of the
on the sides. I also use lava rocks. I use Mexican lava rocks.
Like that?
Yep. Do you have any more? Put it in. Yeah, put it in. Yeah. Exactly. Okay, we're good. Yep. Then we'll put tin on top.
Sorry. This is my father used to use. Yes.
Isn't that crazy, Ella? It's like crazy. Yeah. Did you ever see it done before? Yeah. Just you want to cover the edges to seal it.
What we do know is that everywhere on Earth where earth oven technology was important, women were the dominant role.
Yes. Absolutely.
Men were not even allowed on site when these big earth ovens were being cooked. That was women's job. Men could come and haul the wood, maybe men could dig the hole, but when the real processing starts, women did it, and with some sides, men could be there when they're on the oven. So it's predominantly women's work, and it gets left out of all history. So women have a hero.
Adrian.
I chose that because it's a very ancient tradition that is renewed. In Houston, there are many families who still do this in their backyards, as they do in San Antonio, as they do in the valley. We still do it. My father would do it, and as it shows there, Christine, my niece, renewed it. I wanted to go to an ancient tradition because, to me, it sends us towards the future. And when it does so with an ethical question. And that ethical question is, we received these traditions from people who dealt with the environment in a certain way, who dealt with landscape and with Mother Earth a certain way. And the ethical question is, how then do we hand on to our future descendants so that they can cook and drink water that's clean, as we did until a few years ago, until a few decades ago, I should say, a few decades ago. So these are the ethical questions that our ancestors give us, and food passes that on to us. I'm going to take a parenthetical here because I was told by Christine that when I start talking about food, as I am now, I need to thank the cooks who have been feeding us for these 2 days and who are present here. For those of you who haven't attended the cooking sessions, we have 10 chefs who came from across Texas and who have been cooking a lot of this ancient foods. And I'll ask them to stand so that we can recognize them. Would you please stand and let's give them a welcome. say hello to them. So Christine, thank you. I think I've done my job. The other reason I chose this clip is to talk about film. My first career was as a filmmaker. I did that for the first 15 years in my first career. And my approach to filmmaking is storytelling that doesn't look at people, but attempts to be with people, so that the story generates itself from the scene. And I was very fortunate to be working with Anibal Caponer is the director. This is the way he does film. He believes in community filmmaking. And the producer, Virginia Diaz, also. So there were three of us. There was a camera person, who's a wonderful talent, as you can see. He's from Latin American also, highly sought after as a filmmaker for feature films. And with no lighting, and we would go into, for example, in this scene, there are no double takes. There are some production processes that say, for example, to the cook, would you please pour that again so I can get the shot? We did none of that. There is not any overtakes, second takes. Whatever happens, happens. The theory, the philosophy that we had was put the camera y que la vida viva, and we capture the life and the feeling, so that we don't want to be looking at the people. We want you to, if you have been in this making of a barbacoa, for you to feel that you're there. I recognize that scene. I know it. So this is what we wanted to capture, the feeling of the food. So to me, filmmaking is very much like food storytelling. Both are telling the same story. And that's why I chose that. I want to conclude with a quote from Monica Munoz Martinez. Her book is called The Violence Never Leaves You. And in this book, I think the book is about 2 years old, I think, two years old. And she documents the violence that was committed against Mexicans in Texas, where it was state-sanctioned violence. They would kill you, they would murder you, and it disappeared from the public imagination. However, what she did is she visited the families, and the families kept the scrapbooks, kept the names and the pictures of their father. He was killed by Texas Ranger so-and-so, and all those narratives. And she has collected this and linked it to press, to funeral records, and she gives you a complete fact-based history of the violence and lynchings of Mexican Americans. And the reason I bring that up is because she makes a point that says why Mexican American studies are so important, as Dr. Liliana said. We need to know our history. She quotes it this way. Even in this 21st century, we are still often denied the opportunity to imagine our ancestors as participants in the construction of Texas history, or to learn about the indigenous perspectives on the understanding of conquest, colonization, and slavery. And this is important because we want to be architects of memory. Museums, journalists who are here, we form a certain structures of architects of our memory. We have to participate in those things by telling our stories. So I want to just say two things in closing. One, we need Mexican American studies at universities and colleges. And we need conferences like this. I hope we're committed to make this happen again. It should not be a one-time thing. And also, Dr. Leslie Bush said that because she has been working on this conference, she has already contacted her colleagues in archaeology and realized that they need to be talking to archaeologists in Mexico, in northeastern Mexico. And so they're planning to have some sort of conference and some sort of dialogue so that these things can come together. I mean, we have to be architects of our memory, both through food and through film. So the future, looking at the future, is what this Encuentro is all about, toward the spirit of welcoming. So I'll close with the fact that the Encuentro today and in the future is about all of us together building a table where all are welcome.
Thank you, Dan. Your selection highlights the current Mexican-American practice of making barbacoa, and also the unbroken tradition that still exists in the preparation of food. Whether it's in the backyard or the yard, if it's a store, or you use crock pots, or you use pressure, steam, appliances, whatever the technology is, this practices still continue. So and so what now I would like to do is to ask anyone in the audience for your questions or comments to our participants here. If you have any questions, raise your hand and we'll be ready to answer.
Dr. Brianna, how are you incorporating the issue of concept of culture and food and memory in the curriculum for the teachers? Repeat the question.
So the question, oh yeah.
Okay, my question was, how are you incorporating the concept of culture and food and memory in the curriculum for K-12 Mexican American Studies?
So this is actually very new, like the incorporation of food. I'm actually going to do a presentation for middle school students on food, but we're still developing curriculum. You know, this has been a long struggle. I mean, this is an old colonial issue. I mean, our official, books were burned, our moshlis, right? I'm thinking of the Mayan codices, the Nahuatl codices, and I'm thinking of the student walkouts during the Chicano movement in the 1960s, 1970s, So we are still in the process of developing curricula. In San Antonio, there are about maybe 25 teachers that teach Mexican American Studies. There is still not a statewide curriculum, right? We do have standards. And so it gives each district or community the flexibility to incorporate that, but food and memory are definitely important. And so this is going to require, I think, a lot of resources, not only in terms of getting school districts to approve of these courses, to support courses, but the actual resources to develop curriculum, And so to bring in the food experts, right? To bring in anthropologists, archaeologists who can have conversations with educators, because most of the teachers who are teaching ethnic studies, whether it's, African American, I'm thinking of Mexican American studies, right, in particular. These teachers haven't had access to Mexican American studies ever, and their own education. So they're learning as they're creating curriculum themselves. So, we do need to center food, we do need to center memory. I mean, I do it in my college level course, right? And when I piloted my foodways class a couple of years ago. But food, memory, and culture are central. And we begin with, storytelling. We begin with the Mayan and Nahuatl codices. We study those codices. We study, I'm excited that we'll be able to study, 17th, 18th, 19th century cookbooks written by women, We'll be able to, they'll be able to document recipes that have been passed down by their family members. So digital storytelling, I'm doing my best to learn the digital tools that our students and our youth know. And that they use on an everyday basis. But that is a very good question.
Okay, thank you so much for your sharing. I have a question, but before I begin that, I want to thank you also. Dr. Alston Thomas was actually one of my teachers. I'm a student at Texas A&M in cultural anthropology. He passed away, unfortunately, in 2021, June. So I was very much surprised, pleasantly so, that he was featured in two of the clips that you all showed. So, but Dr. Thomas was one of the teachers who, no matter what course he was teaching, he would typically say something about earth ovens. He can probably teach you college algebra, and he's going to take the earth ovens. And you know how he is. But what I recall, and it's been some years that I took a course with him, that there may be various types of food that are cooked in the earth oven, and there may be various different designs for the earth ovens. So I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit. Thank you.
I guess that's for me. Yeah. We saw animals being cooked in the earth ovens here in this clip, and I think Christine mentioned that it's several hours. I think meat cooks a lot quicker, and of course the smaller the meat, the quicker it cooks. But for lechuguilla hearts and really tougher things like large, tough lechuguilla hearts, agave hearts, we're looking at 36 to 72 hours, and for some of those the agaves out toward El Paso, where you have a really big agave heart, but that's going to be 72 hours. And I've seen, and I think it was also in the clip that there are many variations, as you probably know, on earth ovens. In terms of how they're constructed, we saw rocks being heated up in a separate fire and then placed in the pit. Have you been part of the crews for a while? Texas State and Texas A&M would alternate years.
I've heard of it.
Building the experimental earth ovens. And we did one at Shumla, at the Shumla campus west of Del Rio in December of 2022 to help Charles Koenig with his dissertation research. Anyhow, we cooked lechuguilla hearts, and the way that the folks at Shumla have been constructing the earth ovens is you dig the pit and you put a big sort of teepee of long sticks, because that's what's easy to gather on the land, and then you wedge the rocks into the pile of sticks and set it on, and sticks, because it's brush, it's fairly narrow diameter woods out there, but they're very hard. Well, let's not get into wood density, but it's a really cool topic. So you wedge the limestone chunks into the wooden teepee, set it on fire, and then the wood, as it turns to coals, and because of the wood density, these are great long-lasting coals, it collapses into the pit, and that's when it's down to coals, that's when you come in and put your packing material. It was wet linen and burlap in this clip, but prickly pear pads, anything with moisture that will protect, that just sits between your food items and the coals, and then your food, more packing material, prickly pear pads, grapevines, moist grasses, whatever you can get, and then you cover it with earth, and you have somebody monitor it to make sure that there are no holes, because that's when I was not present, but A&M students have told me the year that there was raw rabbit coming out of the earth oven was because there was a leak, and even a small leak will cause problems. That's probably, does that answer your question? There are many, it's part of Elston's legacy that lots of us can talk about earth ovens for just days and days. Thank you.
I would take a point of privilege as a practitioner. Cooking with an earth oven, I'll just make a point that the wood does matter. Yeah. One, the wood does matter. If you cook with oak, it will not be the same as if you cook with mesquite. You must cook with mesquite and watch the flame all night long. This is where you get like your nephews and your teenagers to watch the fire. And this is when you break out the beers. But the wood is very important. Curing the whole is several hours, but cooking is based on weight of what you're putting in the pit. And so you do have to know what you're cooking, because you can get it raw and have absolutely no leaks of any kind coming out of the ground. So we improvised using tin, but that's clearly not an ancient technique, right? But that's what my grandparents used, and that's what they had available. So we improvise as we go, part of that continuum, but it's a long process, and it's not a single person process.
Thank you so much. I have a question about the exchange the cultural exchange in foodways that may have taken place between people experiencing slavery and our indigenous peoples. And also, I'm really curious to understand what was found in the missions, because I think we don't often hear about that experience. Thank you.
Well, in the missions, now I have to say that in case of Leslie, you're the expert in missions and plant identification, right? But I can tell you with the missions, even in San Antonio today, if you go visit those missions, is that you will find a list of all the fruits that they would prepare. The wild fruits, for example, plants, bushes, animals, and all that, they have it there. But you also have to realize that the missions were an assimilation institution. It's to bring the Indians and to assimilate them into Mexican culture or Spanish culture. I mean, that's how it is. Also, in many cases, many of these indigenous people felt also safe in the missions. Because they were, remember that they were treated as slaves too. And they were sold as slaves and sent to Mexico, their families, their children, and all that. So that part I can say, yes, it is true that the part of the slavery is there. Now, what I wanted to know more is, what kind of foods they contribute, or who did the cooking. Or they were told to cook this way, which is, sort of a very oppressive way of eliminating somebody's food practice when you have to cook it my way. And you know how that feels even in our own families. When your mother tells your grandparents, no, you gotta do it, and you wait for them to leave the kitchen. And so I have always found that in the cooking, there is resistance to it. And I think that the missions serve that function. But now with Leslie, you work in missions and you have come and dug up things and analyzed them technically.
Listen, the missions on Sabah is where I have done most of my mission work, and it's a wonderful question and deserves nuanced study, and mostly what I can say is, I'm sorry, we don't know. It's so much easier to identify trade items. There's hazelnut shell at the Sensoba mission that probably came from Spain, actually, because the other nearest hazelnut is Arkansas, and there's some, obviously kind of people were in contact with Central Texas as well, but given the mission inventories, it probably came from Spain. So it's much easier to identify exotic objects and which people were enslaved and what they were doing there. So thanks for your question.
Also,
yeah, go ahead.
I want to add to this part of slavery. The Spanish in the 1750s or 1740s and all that, it's well documented. They had a system called the encomienda system, where the explorer or rancher would get permission from the governor to go and round up a group of hunters and gatherers and enslave them and take them to the ranch to do the work. And then when the work was done, they would release them, but keep their wives and children. So that's the way they can then let them come back again. And that was a Spanish policy. That changed later on, because in the 1700s, 1750s, there's a mission on Bernardo in Guerrero, Coahuila, across the legal path. And in that mission, they had a system that decided that they were not going to have an encomienda system. That they could come to the mission when they wanted to come. They let them go out and either stay or leave, and that is documented. But yes, they went through a lot of that, and of course, sometimes I think some missions were places where they felt safer. But in San Bernardo, what happened is that they had a smallpox infection, and many hundreds of them died. And so they already didn't want to go. So they were in a very ambivalent situation. So they were not here or there, but you know how it feels when you also don't know whether you're Mexican or Indian or whatever. Is a very, what they call anthropologists, a liminal stage. What is in Catholicism? Purgatory? Purgatory? But I just wanted to talk about this issue and the different forms slavery took on. It's unpaid labor. So don't do internships, you know. That's what I tell my students, because I always say you're gonna have an internship, but it's late. Really, I mean, you don't get paid. So I would always tell them, yeah, we'll write this proposal, but, you know, never go to a job when you're not paid.
Are you looking for a dissertation topic? Same with Mission Dolores.
I want to thank y'all for, wow, this is, anyway, I want to thank y'all for presenting this today. I tried a lot of the food over there today, it was amazing too. My question is more, I heard you make a comment about the future, and typically when our indigenous cultures are brought up, it's more of the context of ancient. Like we don't exist in the past, it's only in ancient. And whenever any conversations about the future, whether it be through pop culture and film, you'll never see any resemblance of indigenous people, unless they're blue on another planet or something like that. And when I think about like what it takes to move people in recognition of this, I wonder what's like, I know there's groups in Houston, indigenous groups do practices, but how do we keep this going here? I don't know if y'all have recommendations on how to build that off and make the connections from people who are south of so-called the U.S., border Mexico, who are indigenous communities here, with indigenous communities that are from so-called Texas. And like, how do we build those relationships, and how do we continue space that is growing to make sure that younger kids see this visible, so by the time they get to our age, they're like firm on knowing where they come from and how to build things moving forward.
You raise a very important question, right? Because, and that's one of the reasons why I really enjoyed the segment that I selected, was because it makes us present to, I'm sorry, the lights are very glaring. Makes us present to the importance of acknowledging indigenous peoples, not only of the past, but of the actual present. I know, I think of our own community, my own community in Yanaguana, San Antonio, it is a city of many indigenous peoples, right? And so, you have the Coahuiltecan, the Capitan Coahuiltecan community. You have folks who are also, who are interacting with the Texas Heritage Project that Rudy de la Cruz leads over there. He is collecting oral histories with people, who live on the south side of town or who have connections to the missions. There's a lot to learn, right, about how we are connected, but also to understand our unique histories, our unique traditions, our unique foodways, because, we are not all the same, and even though we might share histories of colonization, we also have our unique, the nuances, right, the cultural nuances that make our communities, our families unique, and so I see it as, we are at a point in time where we can build those bridges across communities, where we can gain a better understanding of our own positionality within the communities that we live in. And I see myself as someone who is constantly learning as well, because as I said, I never learned about indigenous peoples past and present, in Yanaguana, in occupied territory known as San Antonio. I had to learn it through Mexican American studies. I'm still learning it from the descendants of the original peoples, who may be connected with the Pairaya, who are connected to Coahuiltecan peoples across the border, right? And so I think there is a lot of learning that we can do. And so, I wish I had more to offer, but I think I think there are many opportunities where we can build those bridges across communities.
I was gonna, you said that you felt like you didn't have, you wanted to offer more, and I think you're doing all you can, and I think maybe the lesson is attack on all fronts, that I will be more in contact with colleagues in archaeology in northern Mexico, and we will have more interaction there in the professional sphere. We're working K-12, we're working college classes, all of it matters.
Yes. I like that from my personal experience, that to affirm the ability of each of us to do it, to do what you're saying. And I think if I get your question, it is how do we continue forward the power that our traditions, ethical standards, mores, towards the future. Because we know that we are not of the epistemology or of the system that is received. And Antonia Castañeda is a scholar. She's now in San Antonio. She says, have the confidence to claim your experience and that of your community. And I would follow that by saying that although in the public imagination we are invisible, our food was invisible, in the real world where we live, which is in el seno de la familia, en la comunidad, it's strong. Women, when my mother cooked, she was narrating my identity. She was telling me who I am. And even though when I went to high school, I went to boarding school, and I went in and I had written down mariachis, all these songs, corridos. And 10 years later, when I came out, I was singing Peter, Paul, and Mary, country western song. This is true. This is true. I was just transformed. So it is a recent journey of me to reclaim my Huahuiteco. But I know I'm that because although I didn't have the K through 12, because as you say, we're developing out of when we were oppressed, I knew that when someone gave me a tortilla con aguacate, my body felt connection to the land. Oh, this is me. So through food, hundreds of years, we've been doing it in the power of the country. So we're doing, claim your ability to narrate who we are in those spaces. My mother comes to me with a molcajete and says, "Es this un tecolote?" She didn't say mano, which is a Spanish word. And my father once gave me a squash and he says, "Este es tatuma," which is the indigenous word. He didn't say, "Este es calabaza," he says, "tatuma." You know, these little things, they may be very small, but they're powerful because they happen in the intimate spaces. So I have, like the chefs, that's what we've been all about. I mean, these little things we think they're small, they're very powerful. They have sustained us through 500 years of oppression.
I'd like to add what Dr. Bush said, that this kind of problem, the question that was posed, it has to be addressed in different fronts. For example, if you're cooking in your house, make sure or try to get your children to help you in one activity in front of them. Also, and I've seen this, that it crosses class lines among Mexicans, even from, upper class, even millionaires. And we have them in Texas, the Mexicans and poor people, is when they have their children in the kitchen, helping them and doing things and explaining to them, is to incorporate them. And I think that is important. The other thing is that I wish that there were more statewide and public education curriculum. And that's a problem here in Texas, is to be able to accept that. And I think it will be signed as a law that you could not teach that before. It's happened in other states. The other thing that I look forward to, and I've seen it as very positive, is the culinary institutes. And one of them that I have followed and go to YouTube and check the curriculum is what is the name of the school that you teach in? South Texas College. There's a culinary institute. And those are cropping up, and many of the people are studying in culinary institute. Many of you, like Bobby, you did that, and you have others. And you learn now not only the techniques, but also the flavor principles. And I think it's very important. And what you teach in those culinary institutes, in Texas colleges, in MECA, is that you're also teaching the history. But also when you have students, like in in your class that you have 10 or 12 students. Those students are there because they want to learn from you or a teacher. So those what I mean is by the different fronts that you have to do to continue this. And I will end this with what also was discussed, I think today or yesterday, when one of our colleagues here in the audience said, if all of you could get together and open a restaurant, what would you call it? And I think with me, what Nadia said resonates with me. He said that there will be no nationalism involved. Because, you know, when you start saying, this is my region, this is my food, this is this other food, and all this, that kind of crude nationalism happens to be that the line between that kind of nationalism is very thin because it divides racism and cultural nationalism. To have nationalism and racism, they tend to be a very thin line. So to me, I do agree that sometimes I think that we should not have those categories. And I can go on and on for that because all of you, when I go to restaurants and I love to eat, but I see signs like this original Mexican, this authentic Mexican, this handmade Mexican, and then you have contemporary Mexican, modern Mexican, noble cuisine, and on, those all categories. And sometimes I think that that also divides us. And the bottom line is, in the discussions that the chefs had yesterday and today, you will find out also that they have a different perspective of food, that they'll learn from everything. But keep in mind, I don't know if, did we select any chef below 30 years old? Yes. Some of you are, yeah, you know, but you're young, and it's still, according to us, you know. But I think that that's one way to tackle that problem. And it is, like you said, it's at the different fronts. And you cannot delegate that kind of cultural learning to schools only. It has to be at the house.
Because you were talking about, I was just thinking of my own, you know, preparation. I completed a certificate in Mexican gastronomy about a couple years ago at the Escuela de Gastronomía Mexicana in Mexico City. And, you know, it was a great curriculum. I appreciated the Mesoamerican focus, right? I mean, it was a really deep dive. And then we learned about the regional cuisines, right? The Oaxaca, and, you know, central Mexico, northern Mexico, and it stopped at the border, you know? And I know, Adan, in conversations with you, you've talked about your own preparation, right? Your own training at the CIA, right? It's sort of like Texas Mexican food doesn't exist. And so I really see the many ways in which our chefs here today, including you, because we've always sort of been on the margins in many ways, that it's in the margins where you can actually create something new. And I think this idea of Texas Mexican food is really innovative because, you know, if you study Mexican gastronomy in Mexico, you're not going to get anything that we've learned in this Encuentro, right? And you're not going to get it in sort of these right stream institutions, you know, where you're learning European culinary techniques, right? And there's nothing wrong with those techniques, right? There's nothing wrong with those foods. But this is why this piece is so important, because it's affirming the foodways of the people, the culinary techniques, the ingredients, the recipes, the storytelling, the history of a people, our collective struggles, our collective dreams. And so I'm just, I'm very present to how historical this is.
I do believe it was a historic moment. I think what Mario was telling me, sharing me, that you also believe that that was a historic moment. Our people, our chefs talking about our food with our stories and the origins. I do believe that's true, and I would add that the food that you cooked, the food that we have here, is highly influential. In the restaurant industry, there are tabulations of trends, and Mexican food is at the top. It's just a very strong restaurant trend. And the acknowledgement of what Mexican food is South Texas and Northeastern Mexico. For example, what I'm saying is that the food that we're cooking and the way that we're cooking is affecting what people in the United States think Mexican food is. If you think of enchiladas, they don't have an idea of iguana with black cheese, and they don't have that. They have the idea of ours. And if you think about nachos, for example, I was in England, named nachos. That's a Texas-Mexican creation, born on the border there. So my point is that it may be overlooked, but in real life, what we're doing is very influential. The ideas that you have, the chefs, the intuitions that you were saying, you go through intuitions, they're very powerful in terms of the industry of what Mexican food is in the imagination of the American public, it seems to me.
And also to realize that much if you're a chef or you're a food scholar or food writer, is you also have to be aware of your own prejudice, of what you like and don't like. And it's not bad to have prejudice, but it's bad when you enact them, you know. And I'll tell you this, I confess to you, when I was growing up and I was in high school, my version of American food was I would tell my mother to buy me this TV dinner, Swanson TV dinners. And on Friday, it was my, like Taco Tuesday for me, Friday was American dinner. And I would tell her, cook it, and she would cook it and put it in the oven. We didn't have microwaves. And this was my perception of American food, was this Salisbury steak with mashed potatoes and green peas, you know, and I would eat. I mean, and I look at it that American food was not that way, but I would eat it, and believe me, it tasted like metal, but I still would do that, and I felt very proud of myself and look forward to Fridays and to that Swanson dinner. And I liked it, and my mother, well, she was my mother, she tried to indulge me, but I wanted to do, and so she didn't have to cook on Fridays. But I think that is very important is to think also about what are our prejudices that we have towards our food and towards other food. And also remind yourself that there are some restaurants, all of us here have experience, and even Mexican restaurants, that serve bad food. And I know, I mean, No, I won't go to the name of restaurants, but I told Alan, if he wanted me to give him a tour of bad Mexican restaurant, they don't fail, and I eat all the food, don't get me wrong, I eat it, but it's rough. It sometimes, yes, well, it looks like food that somebody ate before. On the plate. We were talking because those are also contradictions that we have, that if a Mexican person, a Mexican descent person makes it, that it's legitimate and good and all that, and all of you know that that's not. And some of you have admitted that. And yesterday and today that some of your aunts or mothers did not cook. Yeah.
One of my aunts was wonderful. We loved her at parties. But the running joke was, you could anchor a boat with her enchiladas.
No, there's also a lot of bad food.
Actually, it's a good segue question. I'm Brian. I'm looking for a career change, by the way, so if there's any paid internships, I'm totally down to start cooking.
Yes, well, you have chefs here that can hire you.
And my question is, you know, given all that you've said about the importance and the history and the power of this food, how do we protect it? Where does it belong? The recipes, the ingredients, and you know, who gets to eat it. I remember fighting with a poor person at Costco who was handing out samples of Swiss chocolate. I was like, what the hell makes it Swiss? What makes this chocolate Swiss? But yeah, there's a real question. Indigenous culture has been stolen. Our food has been stolen. The world has made billions, trillions of dollars off of it. It's been incorporated into every country's, traditional foods, and the popularity is rising, right? Look at Eva Longoria show in Mexico. UNESCO recognizing Mexican food cuisine as, very, very important. So where does it belong? How do we protect it? And what are your thoughts on, who gets to claim it, own it, etc.?
It's a really great question. And I keep thinking of the chili queens, of San Antonio, the women, the working class women who would prepare chile con carne, in the mercados. And then they were outlawed by city government, which was largely run by whites.
Yes.
And the people who profited from the displacement were the white restaurateurs. And also food industry, the industrialists who started producing and manufacturing, chili powder, red chili powder, and spices, and it's really infuriating to learn this history of how these women were banned, how they were criminalized, how then they were forced to work in white-owned businesses. Oftentimes, working in the very factories that probably stole, their recipes, or working in the restaurants. The Comida Casera, that we enjoy I think in our homes. I think one way to maybe safeguard it or support it is by supporting the chefs, our local chefs. Yes. Going to the restaurants, going to their pop-ups, buying the recipe books, or encouraging them to write the recipe books so that they can be shared in our community. But that's something that I'm thinking that just sort of pops, in my mind right now.
And it's supposed to practice. I mean, you yourself to prepare these foods, and I think you prepare healthy foods and you make them at home. But also to identify those public restaurants that you like to go eat and support them. But I think that's the way to protect it, the continuity is to practice it, like I said, it is do it at home, go and eat. And here, I'm not just going to say eat for the chefs or Mexican, but try the different foods. We have to be adventurous, right? On that.
Except when you and I did it 2 nights ago.
But I think that is important. It is coming. I mean, all of you are doing it. I mean, look at the audience today, yesterday, today. There's a need for this. And I think that it is thriving, that we're not losing it.
I'll third that, to have a tradition, to strengthen the strong, beautiful, innovative core of this tradition that I've experienced over the last couple of days, and radiate strength from there through information, letting people know, is a much healthier and innovative, friendly way of being than living in fear and closing down your borders. You can cook this, you cannot cook this, and then the analogy to our national borders is obvious. When you start living in fear and locking down your borders, it's not healthy. So, and what I've seen the last couple of days is so beautiful and healthy, and I think to grow that is the way to go.
I'd like to add on that idea that it is born of joy. I think this has been mentioned by the chefs that you come from a position of joy. I think our resistance, we are not, the theme of the movie was tacos, feminism, and cultural resistance. And resistance is born of joy and celebration. The reason we resist is because we're celebrating in ways that are not recognized. We want to share that. But geez, there was something you said. The other one was, I forgot. Sorry.
We have one more question.
Yes, I have two questions, and I want to thank the panel for the wonderful information. Dr. Bush, during your archaeological studies, some of the agricultural and culinary tools, were some of them made out of copper, and also for Dr. Saldana regarding the recipes and the trade and exchange today, to families pass on the seeds and the seasonings and a combination of ingredients to prepare the food. And those are my questions. Thank you.
The copper that I know about before colonization is largely artistic. Copper embossing on masks, copper ears, wonderful copper ear spools at Cahokia, at the big mountain center near St. Louis. And there's copper found in Central Texas that hasn't been published yet, but it's definitely sourced from the Great Lakes, so stay tuned for a year or two. And then, of course, with Spanish colonization, you see copper kettles, copper pots, copper kettles, which indigenous people sometimes use as copper pots and kettles because they work for that, but also to cut them up into tinkling tones and use them again for decoration and for sound on the Diane's here somewhere, but on jingle dresses, the jingle dancing. So no, I'm not aware of copper as agricultural tools. People today also use it for the finishing work on making stone tools, and that's a possible or plausible use of copper in the past. So, but it's mostly stone and wooden tools for the agricultural influence.
Could you repeat your second question?
Our families pass down the importance of using herbs and using seasonings in their preparation of food, such that that doesn't get lost in terms of, for example, the use of cayenne, cumin, turmeric, different seasonings versus a genetic and GMO type equivalence.
Yeah, so I've learned a majority of how I learned how to cook is from my mom. And, she always calls me ajo, garlic, pepper, and the molcajete, y después tanteale, right? So going by how you taste the food. But there are certain spices, there are certain herbs that are prominent in, Texas Mexican food. I'm thinking of like oregano, I know for like menudo, right? Oregano. I'm thinking of, black beans are not a part of, my culinary tradition, but I do prepare them with epazote, which is an edible quelite. And people in present-day Mexico, especially the South, have been using that particular quelite for many, for a long time. But I would say, I keep thinking of Meredith Abarca's work. When she interviews Mexican-American working class women and how they transmit that knowledge, that culinary knowledge. And for the most part, she found that this knowledge was transmitted through sazon, right? Through the idea of how the food tastes. But there are herbs, there are quelites, there are spices that I would say are a part of Mexican gastronomy. Some that were introduced via colonization, via the expeditions, right? Like allspice, anise, cinnamon, and not just for like the savory dishes, but the sweet dishes. And I'm also thinking of, garlic, black peppercorns, allspice, oregano. I'm thinking of like other herbs and spices. But those are largely, I would say, transmitted within the family. Within the actual intimate space of the home, of the kitchen.
Well, I want to thank all of you for your comments and questions. And And what I want to do now is to turn over this to Christine. Have any other comments or remarks, Christine, that we have to make?
Okay, I think we're getting ready to wrap up, and as we do, you know, when we came up with the theme for the Encuentro, we used the molcajete. You've probably seen it splattered all over the place. This was an intentional, thoughtful image that we chose. You know, as I was listening to the conversation, we talked about continuum, we talked about ambivalence, how do we know who we are? We talked about rediscovery and displacement here, and all of those are real disparate ingredients in a conversation and a panel. They don't match. If you're displaced, how are you part of a continuum, right? So it's interesting because when you put something in a molcajete, you have to grind it and smash it. Adan boasts that he can crush a serrano chile in 5 seconds in a molcajete. This is like his little claim to fame, the molcajete, right? So that requires some force. It requires, you know, some violence almost, right? And you're putting these ingredients that don't really necessarily always fit. You're putting seeds, you're putting tomatoes, you're putting garlic, all these different textures, all these different colors, and what are we going to get out of it? But anybody who does know how to use a molcajete, and if you don't, you know, please go out and buy one and try it, because you end up with something really beautiful at the end. And so I hope that today, even though we went through some questioning, some ambivalence, some displacement, something uncomfortable, that each of you now has a desire to go out and find out how you can be part of the molcajete that creates something really beautiful. Thank you very much.
It's an awkward ending. Just alt tab. I didn't do shit.
There is a QR code on your program book. Lisa has a book. If you can look on your program book, there's a QR code in it. Please give us your evaluation. We need that. It's on your book. Please get one before you leave. We really need your evaluation. And then there's also a gift bag for you on your way out. So please pick one up. And there's also a restaurant, curated restaurant list that's outside if you are curious on many different kinds of restaurants in Houston. It's a bright yellow card. So thank you very much.